Hi again then guys, and so we've got something a little bit different for you today. This is not replacing the top speed tunes on an ongoing basis, but here and there, as long as you guys find this helpful and interesting, we may possibly replace a daily tune here or there with a PP specific track tune for any vehicle, really. Feel free to suggest vehicles and PP levels that you'd like to see, perhaps, if you do find this helpful, or vehicles which perhaps are difficult to tame, as it were, which I'll make a tune for to allow it to handle well, etc. But in this initial episode, well, it's not really an episode, it's going to be the format kind of like the Top Speed series, but in this initial format we're having it for a vehicle which deserves far more use. It's so ridiculous to me that we're not allowed to tune this car very much. It just makes no sense, especially considering that GranTurismo is a partner of Nissan. It was a perfect marketing opportunity to make this car brilliant, and then they just didn't allow us to tune it, which just really wastes that opportunity. But it is, of course, Nissan's Le Mans Racing LM Nismo. And basically what I've done is I've made it more competitive, because I know this intro is a little bit long, but you do need to set up this car as to what my purpose of this tune is. The problem with the Nismo is quite simply it's not fast enough. And that's not just on the game. Nissan acknowledged that in real life. In the Le Mans, it was not fast enough. As brilliant as the technology was, it just couldn't keep up. So, the answer to that is don't try and take on 660 pp rivals with it, because you're never going to beat them. It's just not possible. The physics of a front-wheel drive Le Mans car just don't work at that level. So, to make the car more competitive, you tune it down to a level where your rivals are forced to give up their advantage, and the main advantage being power. This car, as you can see, detuned to 600 pp, only has 427 horsepower. That doesn't seem to be a lot, but bear with me. You want your racing soft tyres. As far as brakes, we've increased the rear balance to 6. We've lowered the springs to 30.40 and 9. For dampers, we've got 1 on compression, 4 on extension. Anti-roll as low as possible, neutral camber and tow. We can't adjust the gearbox, of course, which is a shame. For the diff, you want the lowest initial torque, lowest acceleration and highest braking. You want to reduce your power down to 67.4%, depending on whether you've done an oil change. It has a huge amount of downforce, which we unfortunately can't change. And you want a 65 kilo ballast put all the way to the front of the car. And I'll explain more as to why in a second. But that's it for the tune setup, so now let's take it out to the track to see what it can do. Now, as I was saying, this car does require a little bit more explanation than other prototypes, and the reason why I've reduced it down to 600 pp, because that amount of power sounds pretty pathetic, but the reason why I've done that is because you have to factor in that this is a front-wheel drive car, and the facts are, no matter how good the technology is, you cannot put an insane amount of power or torque through a front-wheel drive car without having problems. Now, even with this tune, it still wheel spins a little bit out of corners, but it's a lot better than it was. The handling is now amazing around corners, especially around 100 mph cruising corners, such as the S-bends toward the end of this lap. As far as performance though, even down-tuned to 427 horsepower, this car can still do over 190 miles per hour on Lasarte and even on the Nuremberg Ring, so it's certainly no slouch. Now, the reason why I've reduced the power, and the reason why I'm saying about front-wheel drive cars, is because it's to do with the physics of driving. If you've got, say, 600 horsepower going through the front wheels, what happens when you accelerate? Apart from the obvious fact of wheel spin. Well, one of the things that happens in any car is that all of your weight transfers to the back through G-forces, etc. That means that all of the weight balance is shifted over the wheels that are not being driven, the back. Now, in a rear-wheel drive car, that's a good thing, because it means you now have more weight over the driving wheels. This car, though, is front-wheel drive. So when you floor it off the line or out of a corner, all the weight transfers to the wheels which aren't being used or aren't being driven, which means you have less weight over the front, which causes wheel spin. However, when you brake, the reverse happens. All the weight transfers to the front, giving you more grip over the driven wheels, which is why, and it makes sense once you know that, which is why you can really slam a front-wheel drive car on the brakes and throw it into a corner without it actually crashing. They love doing that. They can cope with that very well. And that's why, because you're transferring all of the weight over the wheels that really need grip. It's the same with this car. Don't give it so much power that it can't put the power down. This amount of power allows it to still be fast. For instance, with this tune at 600 pp, and I would of course recommend that you play around with the weight and the power, but with this particular tune, this car can get around the Nuremberg Ring in around around Le Mans, I should say, in around 3.5 minutes. It can get around the Nuremberg Ring in just over 6 minutes, and it feels amazing around Sierra. I'm not the fastest of drivers around Sierra, so my lap wasn't all that great, but I know, based on the feel of the car, that a lot of people could get it to go very, very fast around Sierra. It feels amazing around that track. The wheel spin is very minimal, and if you see these corners here, these are the corners I was referring to, it takes them like a champ. It's phenomenal around these mid-range corners. And I tell you what, you will never spin out in this car because of the front-wheel drive. It handles amazingly well. So if you decide to use this tune, I hope you find it helpful and of course competitive. And like I said, feel free to suggest cars and PP levels in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.